chasing the campaign trail, but we're here now, so we're looking forward to Saturday.
So have you traveled around to all 29 counties?
I have hit everyone except for Rich, Daggett, and I didn't make it down to Paiute, but other than that, I have made it to all 29 counties.
That's good. So how was your last Saturday? Because I know you had to go from Salt Lake Convention to Davis Convention to Morgan, I believe, up to, I believe, Cache, right?
Yeah, so what we ended up doing, there were 6 conventions that day. We started at Salt Lake, we said Salt Lake Davis. We then went to Box Elder and back to Morgan. They did have one at Weber and Cache, but they didn't want us at the one at Cache. But no, we're doing good. We're on the road and we're ready for Saturday.
So how's your chances? How do you feel about this race right now?
Sure, I feel better than I did when I won the chairman's race. I have my odds are a lot better this time than they were the last time I won. So we're pretty optimistic and we feel good about where we're at.
Well, that's good. So because we have time constraints and you have to go around 2 o'clock, and I gotta go to work here at 3. So, what do you say we start this, kick this off and start this going
Yeah.
down? So, let's get into your best 2 minute intro to why you should be the nominee for this Saturday's state convention.
Yeah, no, I mean, let's talk about it for a minute. When you look at it, everybody always says, what qualifies you for political office? What do you think makes you the best candidate? And that's always been hard for me. But with that being said, I grew up in this state. My family's been here for 170 years. We're born and bred in this ground, and we know it, we love it, and we want to see it better for the future. I have 5 kids, and if you can think I ain't going to fight for those kids for 1 second, you're crazy. I'm going to make sure that I do everything possible to make sure that that future is good for my kids and for everybody else's kids around so that they have the same opportunities that I have and that I have had. And I will continue to fight for that. As far as qualifications go, I served as chairman of the Utah Republican Party. That's the second big, people don't realize this, but the Utah Republican Party is the second biggest organization in the entire state next to the church. And so it's like you're being the CEO of group with 900,000 different people, and it is a very eye-opening experience, and everybody should get to have that experience. But we worked intimately with all the counties, seen the different needs. We've basically seen and done what the governor should be doing, is being out with the people, see what their individual needs are. That too. I've been on public lands my whole life. The way that I've been raised in my life, the things that I've done in my life have prepared me for this. I've spent most of my life on public lands and with water resources and dealing with those 2 issues. Those are going to be our 2 biggest struggles over the next 10 years in the state of Utah. And so I think that I am ultimately prepared to meet those challenges head on and be able to address them as good or better than anyone else. You muted, Ty. I can't hear you. Oh, there you
I
are.
always, I always keep doing that. Anyway,
You're
you have
good.
a tight race. You have you, Bill Lyman, Spencer Cox, obviously, and he's going to be on the Jew primary because he went out and gathered signatures where you and Phil have just not done that. And so, with that being said, with the signatures, how you really feel about this nomination on Saturday if you get it
Yeah.
because of the signature gathering.
Now it makes it a little tough, and I will state this: as chairman of the Utah Republican Party, I believed in this system. I poured my heart and soul into making sure the caucus and convention system was still here. It's for people who come from backgrounds like me. And man, I don't know the downtown elite. I am not friends with all the wealthiest donors and the lobbyists in the state, and so I am not able to draw in the huge money. And that was what the caucus convention system was made for. It was made for people to run these races on a smaller budget, but signatures has turned this into a giant money game. And so that's why I opted convention only. And I'm the only candidate in the race that did not file to gather signatures. Others had had packets printed and were having them signed and changed their mind, whatever it may be, regardless. At the end of the day, I was the only candidate that went convention only in this race because I believe in the system. I believe in what's going to happen. And I truly still believe in the party. And that's why on Saturday, we're going to go for 60%. We want to win big and have that convention nomination and be the party's preferred nominee going into the primary. That has always been the game. That has always been the case, and that's what we're going to do on Saturday.
So I think this year, because of the way the preferential poll for the president was conducted, people are a little miscued because of that, because there was such a low turnout that didn't really represent the whole party as a whole, with only being 9%. What's your take on that?
Yeah, and that's we kind of have the worst of both worlds right now because of the signatures. You've seen a decrease in people participating in the caucus convention system. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. People felt like they don't have to. These more moderate candidates that just go out and gather signatures, they don't participate. They don't bring their people to caucus night. They don't try. And so it's a catch-22. Is the cart before the horse or chicken before the egg? Whatever it is, we have the worst of both worlds right now. And so with that, I still feel we have a pretty good spread of where people are at on the spectrum, and ultimately we are going to find out where these delegates lie on Saturday.
That is true, especially with this year, they're using the QR codes instead of during the last convention in 22, the Mike Lee convention, where you initiated clickers. Now they're using the QR codes. Do you think that's going to be a factor, especially with the older generations?
It does make it a little difficult. And when we were there, we made sure we had ample help desks when things like this would happen. I am a firm believer in let's keep it simple. That's why we opted for the clickers. The clickers have been used in the past years. You can't take those clickers out of the building. Your vote is identifiable with a number on that. You can audit your vote. You can check that. You can match it up against the vote count. Everybody can make sure that it is transparency. Transparency in elections is of the utmost importance. I don't worry about it. I worry about it, the ease of it and having glitches. That's always, who as chairman, man, that was just like, all right, let's hope this goes smooth. And when you're working with technology, you can just expect that it's not going to. So I hope on Saturday they have plenty of help decks, plenty of extra where people can get to vote, make sure they have everything in place for their ADAs. Yeah, and so it should be okay, but I hope for a smooth thing on Saturday. I trust party leadership. I believe that they'll do the right thing.
Do you see a pushback on Saturday for paper ballots?
Oh, you're going to see it. It happens every year. Both years I was chairman at the convention, there was a push for paper ballots, and I said, "Hey, this is your guys' meeting. You guys decide what you want to do with it." So I put it back to the people and said, "Hey, it's your vote. Go ahead and vote it." And both times it was voted down, the paper ballots, and they opted to use the electronic balloting both times.
But did you, during your 2 years, did you have the backup plan for the paper ballots at
Always.
the
There were always paper ballots in the back room because if something goes south, you have to have them there. You never go into those conventions without a contingency plan ever.
Okay, good, because that's going to be a big thing come Saturday, because people are going to want to know, is there a backup plan for the QR codes for paper
Yep.
ballots?
There better be.
Absolutely. All right, let's kick off this first question, and this is a two-part question, and you can see it up here on your screen. It is, when is the last time you read the Constitution, and what made you run in this race specifically to go against the incumbent Spencer Cox?
Yeah, no, I actually got this question yesterday on K Talk, and I said the last time I read the Constitution through was about 5.5 months ago. Completely through it, studied the Utah Constitution and the federal Constitution. So that was 5.5 months ago. What made me run in this race specifically? You look at the quality of leadership and the direction of our state that is set by the governor. That is something I'm very concerned about. I look at federal politics and I look what's happening across the nation, and I don't see a future for the federal government right now. The federal government cannot control themselves. They can't. I've lost faith in what they're able to do and what they can do. I believe all the change that we're going to see in this country is going to come from the states, and I believe that the governor is the one that ultimately sets that direction. So absolutely, that is why I wanted to get involved, because I want to be able to actually make a change. You're muted again.
What are some of the other specifics going into this race against Spencer Cox? Like, what has he kind of done to push you into going with this route?
Sure. No, I mean, let's start with the low hanging fruit. I mean, the social issues, the pronouns, the DEI, the vetoing the transgender sports bill, being soft on those types of things. That was a start. And that's the biggest one for everybody. Saw me on Tucker Carlson 2 years ago when I said, "Hey, if this is the direction the governor wants to go, the Republican Party is not going to follow, because we are not in for DEI. We're not in for the pronouns. We're not in for the woke. We're not going to do that." And that's the low hanging fruit. But beyond that, you look at what we've done with state spending over the last 3 years. We've gone from a $21.5 billion budget to a $29.5 billion budget. We have increased our spending exponentially. We have doubled our dependence on the federal government as far as money goes in the past 3 years under his tenure. We have tied ourselves hook, line, and sinker with the federal government. We can't be doing that. That is where we draw the line. And those are some of the reasons, without getting too deep into why I chose to run.
Okay, well, let's keep going down this rabbit hole with you. And to the second question, which is, what's your number one priority and what steps would you take to achieve it if you're elected?
Yeah, no, number one priority is cutting spending because everything trickles down from spend cutting. What happens is we get dependent on the federal government's money. Look at public education as a primary example. When you look at the federal government and what they're doing to our public education, all the things that you see in schools, the DEI, the pornography in the books, all of those little things, they add up to big things. But that comes from the federal government. The curriculum that comes from the federal government does not represent Utah values. And when we take that federal money, we are accountable to them. So that's what I mean by spending. Everybody says they want their public lands back. Yeah, you and me both. We want our public lands back. We want to be able to have our public lands and have control of those. But as long as we're dependent on the federal government, we cannot push back against the federal government. This dependency is making us vulnerable. It makes us vulnerable as a state, and it makes us vulnerable as a country.
Perfectly well said. And, some of the priorities, especially as you mentioned, the DEI, the pronouns. I mean, we call them governor pronouns for a reason. So that's a good step in the right direction, especially with
Right?
today's youth. And what happened recently with the Nebo School District at Nephi with the
Sure.
furries.
Sure.
Hopefully your kids don't have any of that problem. We don't have any of that here in Sevier County that I know of. But
So far, not any trouble with it. You're seeing it creep in.
all right, and let's get on to the third question, which is, I believe this is a two-part. What or would you make Secretary of State position if elected for election integrity instead of having the responsibility fall upon the Lieutenant Governor? And will you end mail-in ballots going forward like Florida did with Ron DeSantis?
Absolutely. So, first part of the question, Secretary of State. I absolutely believe we should go back to Secretary of State. I believe we keep the Lieutenant Governor position, but I don't think they need to be over elections. They should just be the right hand of the governor. But yes, absolutely back to Secretary of State, who's elected on a different cycle than everybody of all of the other constitutional officers, so that they can oversee these elections, and we're not going to have problems in those. The other thing, mail-in ballots. So mail-in ballots, I'd like to see them go away. Problem is we have too many people in Utah that actually like mail-in ballots, which is an unfortunate thing. But that being said, Kara Birkeland has had the best option I've seen so far. What it is opt-in for mail-in balloting. At the beginning of every election cycle, you have a 3-week window to opt in. You show your ID, you register online, you present that ID so that you get a mail-in ballot for that election cycle. If you don't register within that 3-week period, you don't get a mail-in ballot, and it turns into same day and in person. This way, we're scrubbing the voter rolls every 2 years. We're not getting rid of mail-in balloting because that's when everybody wants to kick and scream, and we are doing our job. So that has been the best thing I've seen so far that actually is going to be able to work.
So with her bill, and basically the mail-in ballots are basically along the Wasatch Front. That they want those, especially the elderly, and they always make that excuse every 4 years. They want to make that excuses like the elderly can't get to the polls. And I'm sitting here like, yes, they can because it's an all-day event from 8 a.m. to almost 8 p.m. at night. So
Sure. Yeah, and
would
like I say, that compromise of a bill, if you're politically aware enough and you're mentally acute enough to go on and to be able to register to get that mail-in ballot, that for sure makes you qualified and able to vote. So I say it's going to be a hard sell to get rid of mail-ins, but this is a good option in the meantime.
well, with part of that election integrity, what about the voter ID?
No, voter ID. I mean, that should be non-controversial, and we need to push for that. If you're not a United States citizen, if you're not a citizen of the state of Utah, you shouldn't be voting in Utah's elections or the federal elections. Period.
No, I definitely agree with that. Moving along, we're going to hit number 4 really quick, which is as governor, will you kick out the Department of Federal Education? This was from a constituent with, as a parent, as she has kids in the school systems up along the Wasatch Front. So, as governor, will you kick out the federal government from the Department of Education, bring it back to the states, and adopt parental rights for parents in their child's education at the state level?
1,000%. And as I talked about a minute ago, if we're dependent on the federal government makes up 9% of our public education funding. It's about $650 million. We can do without the Fed. The second we get rid of that money and stop taking that money, we are no longer accountable to the federal government. They are no longer belong in our schools. We then, as a state, set our own curriculum. We put our own oversight over the curriculum to be able to make sure what's being taught in our schools aligns with Utah values. End of story.
So would you be okay with maybe an interstate compact between us here in Utah, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Wyoming, and Idaho to keep
Yeah.
competition leveled?
Yeah, I mean, I think we could, but I think honestly, we can manage our own education as much as anybody else because you're going to see the test scores, and the test scores are going to prove what we're doing is right, and everybody's going to want to do what Utah does.
Because Utah's at the one of the top 10 in education, unlike Alabama, which is the bottom 10%. And so we don't want to go with that. But the problem is what are the mechanisms that you're going to take as far as kicking out the Department of Education and Higher Education from Washington, D.C. that overburdens us here in Utah?
Yeah, I mean, again, it comes back to not taking that money. Once we stop taking that money, the federal Department of Education has no say over what happens in the state of Utah. They get cut out. The only thing that ties them to us is the money that we're taking from them, and we can do without it, and we will.
All right, perfect. All right, and that's a perfect explanation. And a lot of parents have that concern because they're sick of
Sure.
agency 2,000 miles away that wasn't duly elected sits here and tells us here in Utah how to govern our kids in our school systems, and it kind of makes our state school board null and void to a certain point because they get told what to do by the federal government. So
Yep,
bringing it back to
absolutely.
the states and kicking out the money, that'd be a huge step.
A step in the
So
right
on the
direction.
Absolutely. And question 5 is, what legislation are you going to pass that helps return veterans? I've been down to downtown Salt Lake the last couple of weeks, and this has been a huge thing with the homeless populations, the VA. So, what legislation are you going to pass that helps return veterans, the vet homeless on our streets, crisis plus the VA? And the second part of that question is plus help the homeless population, especially in downtown Salt Lake, so it doesn't spill out to the other 28 counties.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. So, as far as legislation goes, the governor's not the legislative body, and sometimes people want them to be, but I believe that the legislative bodies should lie with the legislators. The governor shouldn't be creating legislation. Can we influence it? Absolutely, and we should set that as a priority. But you work with the legislature to actually come up with those priorities, and that's one that should be a priority for the veterans. I mean, these guys have gone out, they have served our country, they've come home, and they're dealing with things. And let's talk about the homelessness for a minute. We have to start talking about homelessness for what homelessness is. Homelessness has nothing to do with the shortage of housing. Homelessness has everything to do with mental illness and addiction. A lot of these people want to be homeless no matter how much money you put out there, how many buildings you build or shelters you make, you're not going to get them off the street. So the first thing you have to do is start enforcing the laws. Second thing is we need to start getting them the mental help that they need. And unfortunately, call it mean, call it whatever it is. When we did away with the state mental hospitals, these people got put out on the street. They are struggling. They need mental help. But that's it. No amount of money you throw at shelters or anything like that is going to help them.
So would you be okay with maybe implementing more rehabilitation centers along the state if approved by the legislature?
Yeah, like I say, we have to take a step back and evaluate what is the proper role of government. Where should we be putting that money? And in this instance, I think that is something we should be doing is to help rehab some of these people. But we need to make sure that it's also being done right, that the oversight's there. There was just a story here not too long ago about a rehab center that had taken the state for about $13 million. So we have to be sure that the oversight's there, the auditing capacity's there. But the private sector is usually the best place for that to happen, but we need to give it the ability to get the money to the places where we need it.
No, absolutely. And with the shortage of mental health facilities and rehab facilities in the state of Utah. I mean, most of them are along the Wasatch Front. We're in southern Utah, not many for rural Utah. And rural Utah has a epidemic of fentanyl, methamphetamines, as well as other substances, alcohol abuse. So a lot of these facilities could come into play as a vitality for better, healthy families.
Yeah, absolutely.
So right now, when we switch a little bit of a gear to the federal government when it comes to President Trump and President Biden, I think this next question came from a constituent is, and this is going to be a dual sword here because right now it's about 50-50 with Trump being ahead. But what will you do to help President Trump if elected again, if he's elected again, or fight back against Biden administration if he wins the 2024 election?
Yeah, so no, as far as President Trump goes, I supported President Trump at 16, supported him at 20, and I'll support him again in 2024. His policy is phenomenal for this country, did great things for our economy. There was peace in the Middle East. Our energy policy was on point. I think it's important to note that with President Trump, we have to be able to get him back in if we want to secure our southern border, if we want to make our country great again.
Looks like we lost Carson there really quick.
No, you're
And
good.
he's back. Nope, he's back.
I'm back. No, I lost you for a second. So I was saying I supported Trump at 16, supported him in 20, supported him in 24. I will continue to support the president. We as governors have to stand with the president when they start to put an agenda. What their agenda for the country is can be implemented by the governors if it's in the right direction. And if it is in the right direction, we should all pull our weight and get together to support him. The current governor we had has been very vocal about how he feels about the president of the United States. And I doubt that the president will ever come to help Utah because of the governor. Cox has made so many comments against President Trump and against the Biden administration. I mean, we will fight tooth and nail. We are no longer being governed by administrative overreach from the executive branch because that was never met. We never signed on for that as states, and we should have every right to push back against that.
So with that pushback, I mean, we've saw the photos online between Cox and Biden and being buddy at some events, but there's also been talk about him yelling at Biden and so forth. But if you're nominated,
I'd like to see it.
Well, I would too. I think the entire state would. But those are just rumors we can't confirm nor deny. All we see is the pictures of them two being buddy in the same room, coercing with each other. But what will you do to help push back against the Biden administration if he's reelected? Because they are aiming for that 2030 agenda.
Sure. I mean, they're aiming for the 2030 agenda. They're aiming for ESG, central bank digital currency. They're pushing for all these things. The state of Utah has to no longer recognize their ability to do this. This overreach shouldn't be tolerated. And when it comes, it's just like right now, we have illegals being shipped in here from across the country. We should meet them at the border and turn those buses around and send them back where they came from because we're not letting it happen in Utah for far too long. As Utahns, the federal government has said, hey, we're going to do this. And we said, well, we're going to sue you so that you can't, or we want to do this, or we're going to sue you. We're not playing that game anymore. We're going to do what we have to as a state. And if the federal government wants us to sue the state of Utah, they're going to have to because we're not asking for permission anymore.
So I know this isn't one of the questions, but you just brought up illegal immigration. So would you be okay with cutting all aid as far as the state level to illegal immigrants to deter them from coming to Utah?
Yeah, no, we should be doing that. I mean, when we have incentive programs and we're incentivizing them to come here, we're going to get more of them here. But there is a catch-22 with that. So with the illegal immigrants, they are coming to the state and they are driving. And this is something I learned, and this is something that kind of opened my eyes. So I want to pass it on to everybody else so we can actually make an informed decision here. So the reason why they implemented driver privilege cards is so these people could get insurance because they were driving. These illegals are coming here and they're still driving. And they're getting into accidents and they're not insured. Well, your insurance, if they hit me or you or somebody else, if they're not a licensed driver, your insurance a lot of times won't cover that. And they are unable to get insurance as well. And so they did that so that they could be able to know where these people are and actually let them get insurance. So it's a catch-22, and that's something that we're diving into a little bit more right now, how we can combat that while still protect Utahns on the road.
Well, the reason they can't get insurance is because they can't get a state issued ID because of their illegal status.
Yep. Yep. And so we, as the state, started issuing driver's privilege cards, which would allow them to get insurance. And so, again, double-edged sword, and how it's one that I am not 100% sure on how we deal with going forward.
So was that part of the reason because of the maybe the work visas and the student visas that were compatible with that, or how did that go as far as that was concerned?
No, because if you're on a student visa or work visa, you can get that anyways. You can actually, if you're on a visa, you can apply for those anyways. But these are being given to illegal immigrants. And that is, like I say, it's catch 22 right now. It's a hard one. I don't appreciate and I don't like giving them incentives and reasons to come here or privileges that they shouldn't have. But again, they're here. There's nothing we can do about it at the moment as a state. We can't deport them out of the country. We can't arrest and hold them. Those are things we can't do. So if they're going to be on the road and they're going to be driving, we just as well hedge our bet and let them have insurance. So when they hit somebody like you or I or our family, that insurance will actually cover those.
All right. Hey, perfect answer. And I think that's what the citizens of Utah actually need to hear, especially state delegates going into Saturday, because that is a top concern. But speaking of concerns, right now we are heading into a very crucial time. But as you travel between the 29 counties, you haven't hit a couple of them, but during these 29 counties, what are the big issues and concerns with delegates and constituents in Utah that you hear running for governor on a daily basis?
Yeah, the pronouns thing is huge. I hear that from just about everybody. Vetoing the transgender bill one, that's another one I always hear from folks. The spending habits are covered by a lot. The flag change is one that a lot of people are upset about, rightly so. The baseball stadium and the hockey team that we're putting $1 billion worth of taxpayer money into, people are very upset about that. They're upset about the fact that we're not putting in money into our infrastructure, that Highway 6 is still terrible, that Panguitch Dam is leaking, that we're having all these infrastructural issues, yet we can find money for all the things we want, but not the things we need. Those are the main issues I hear about.
So I really hate to do this. I hate going out of order, but since you brought up the baseball stadium, I'm going to come back to question 8, but it ties into question 9 of how you feel about Ryan Smith and his wife bringing the Arizona Coyotes to Utah and Salt Lake City.
No, I love hockey. I served my mission in Canada, and I grew to love hockey, and I love hockey. That being said, we shouldn't be putting government money into it. These private-public partnerships shouldn't be happening. If you can bring them here on your own, you knock yourself out. Love to have them here. We'll support you in everything that you do, but we're not putting taxpayer funds to subsidize your hockey team.
See, I believe that Gail Miller and Ryan Smith both have the billions of dollars in acquisitions to put forth to these stadiums and to these teams for relocation. But why are Utah taxpayers paying for this to begin with? Why was this even passed through the legislature?
That was the same question I asked. What's funny is Kansas City had a ballot initiative on this particular thing. And I said from the beginning, I'm not against baseball. I'm not against hockey, but put it on the ballot. Let people decide if they want to be the ones to pay for it, because it's their money you're taking from it. So in Kansas City, they put it on the ballot 2 weeks ago. They shot it down. They said, we're not paying for a private stadium. And so I believe the same thing should have happened in Utah, and they didn't do it.
So what was the reasoning behind that? Do you know that because we should
I
have had
don't
that?
know. Yeah, I don't know the intimate details into it, but again, it's wrong because it's wrong.
No, and everybody agrees with the whole not paying taxpayer funding to go towards private entities like especially sports and entertainment. And so we agree, but we do welcome the Arizona Coyotes. The problem is
Sure.
we don't want to pay for it, but
Yeah,
we're very
no.
open and welcome to them.
Yeah, love to have them. We need to maintain our infrastructure downtown, make sure the roads are good, make sure the sidewalks are good, make sure it's clean, enforce the laws on the homeless, make sure that it's there. But if they're going to be making upgrades to their property, or they're wanting to build new stadiums, I'm sorry, that's not a place for government money.
Absolutely. So to circle back to question 8, then I know that was a little bit of a softball, but I wanted to get your take on that. But question 8 is really kind of simple: as how do you bridge the gap between rural, urban, and suburban Utah in the state that feels misrepresented by the incumbent? Because you and I are from rural Utah. I've lived along the Wasatch Front for a decade, lived in southern Utah, but there's a huge divide between all three aspects of the state. How do you, as a governor, bridge that?
No, that's an excellent question, and I get asked that quite frequently because everybody says, "Oh, well, are you just going to represent rural? Are you just going to represent urban? What are you going to do?" And no, it's a balance. As a governor, you have to realize this. As governor, you are not elected strictly to represent the people. You're also elected to represent the ground itself, and most of the land resides outside of Salt Lake and Utah County, and so we have to be able to balance that. Being from rural, I understand the problems we have here. I understand the things that we're up against and struggles we're going to have going forward and the pinch points. But my wife is from the city. Her family has been there in the education system for years. So absolutely, we get both sides of it. But the other thing is that bodes well for me is my age. So when you talk about my age, yeah, I fall into the millennial bracket. I'm on the upper end of it, but I was raised in an old way. I was raised on the ranch and I had adult responsibility since I was 8 years old. And so I'm able to communicate because the average age of Utahns right now is 31 years old. I believe we are the youngest state in the country. And so if we want representation that looks like our people, we need to start electing representatives that fall into the same category. That's how I bridge the gap.
Well, that's good, and that's all good and well. But like in reality, though, there is a huge disconnect and a fight between the Wasatch Front doesn't like rural Utah. Rural Utah can't stand the Wasatch Front. Southern Utah wants to be its own little private island and not deal with either or. And so bridging that would really help. But is it a matter of going to these counties all the time and maybe being a representative for everybody, or
Oh,
how
absolutely.
do you?
You have to travel the state. You have to see what's going on in these communities and what they need, and you have to tailor those individually. There's nothing one size fits all that's going to help or save any of them. So the tailored approach needs to come from being out with these counties, finding out what they need, seeing where we can do better for them, and where government can actually help, and where we should take government out of the picture. That is the divide we'll be able to cross. I have no doubts of it.
All right, and so this next question, question 10, this actually came from a state delegate, I believe along the Wasatch Front. Yes, along the Wasatch Front, and it's thoughts and plans on Utah's agriculture, land and water issues, the inland port is which they mentioned a lot, and Utah's economic boom, especially along the Wasatch Front, that needs to kind of cater down to the rest of the state. I know it's like a multi-pronged question.
That is
I'll
a.
let you
I'm going to say
go
we're
ahead.
covering a lot of ground in this one, and so I'll try to synthesize it as much as I can. So let's start with agriculture. Agriculture is vitally important. As of 2019, the United States became a net importer of food, meaning the United States no longer produces enough food to feed itself. We, as the state of Utah, should be putting focus on agriculture and then becoming agriculturally independent and moving towards food independence and local grown food, because the food that comes closer to you is better for you. It's fresher. You get a more quality product. It also bolsters your economy. We should be able to put the infrastructure we need to get our agricultural products processes within the state and then back to the people within the state without the federal government stepping into it. And there's a long list of ways that we're going to do that, but I don't have time for those today. Land. Everybody knows we are maxed out on where we're at. So if we don't start pushing back and getting federal control or public control, state control of our public lands, we're going to have issues. And so we need to be making the most of the land that we do have, but also being constantly minded and moving towards getting our public lands back or getting control of our public lands. Water issues. We don't have a water issue in the state. We have a water storage issue. We should be building storage wherever and whenever we can. I know places in central southern Utah where we just let these reservoirs sit in red tape and have never pushed hard for them. We need to start pushing hard and store every drop of water that comes off of our mountains in the winter. The inland port. The inland port in its inception was actually a really good idea to spread out that manufacturing and give people a route to get rural markets to the city and to get them across the planet. And I agree with that. And I think that that was a good thing. But what the inland port has turned into is not what its original inception was. And it's become a catch all for anything that somebody wants to shove into economic growth. When they did that, here's the other two problems with that. When they created the baseball stadium, And when they created the inland port, they created special tax districts. And when they created special tax districts, what those are is unelected bureaucrats that are able to levy a tax against you. These are unelected people able to put a tax on you to pay for things that they want. So with the inland ports, yeah, it was originally a good thing and would like to see it stay that, but it has moved far beyond the scope. Utah's economic boom. Utah has had an economic boom, and I attribute a lot of our success as a state to that. Problem is, we have put too many eggs in one basket. We have put too much emphasis in technology, and that sector and it has eaten up a huge part of our economy. The problem we don't have we don't have a diverse enough economy in our state to soak up the jobs that come when the layoffs happen in technology. Because when the layoffs happen in technology, they come fast, they come quick, and we take them as they come. But we usually don't have the job market to soak those back up. So we don't have an economic growth problem in this state. We have an economic management problem, and we need to start putting a bigger focus on diversifying instead of just simply growing outwards.
So would you think
That's
the tech sector? Would you think the tech sector along the I-15, not the corridor up by the point of the mountain, do you think that maybe could be spread out towards the maybe a little bit of a rural Utah issue along
yeah.
I-70, along
I think
I-15?
they could, but more so than that, I believe that we need to bring manufacturing back to rural Utah. We need to make sure that our mines stay open, that our schools are employable, that those agricultural products and the processing for those is there, so that rural Utah still has its backbone, because rural Utah is built on agriculture and mining for the most part. And so with that, we have to make sure that those are there, viable to continue to maintain those. But we need more trade jobs. People that are sorely missing employees right now are construction workers, truck drivers, plumbers, you name it. Those are the things we're missing right now, and that's where we should be diversifying our economy.
Well, it's kind of hard because if you go to the Wasatch Front a lot, and so do I. You got the Great Salt Lake on one side, you got the mountains on the other. Same with Utah Lake in Utah County, and then you got all the people live there. So there's not really much room for growth there as far as manufacturing. So they would
Yep.
kind of have to diversify and spill out to the other counties.
Yep, and
But
that
what's
was
the
what the inland
likelihood?
port was originally made for, so that we could move that manufacturing out, but we have not seen that come to fruition.
And well, as governor, what could you do to help rectify that, or work with House Speaker Mike Schultz or Stewart? What would you do with that
Yeah,
to
no,
try and help?
yeah, I think we need to fast track some of these things and getting that infrastructure out into rural Utah that's actually going to allow for those, because we do have manufacturing facilities, but they're not able to grow at the rate that they should be growing to provide those jobs for these small towns. A lot of these small towns have turned into commuter towns, especially this close where we're at to Utah County. People live here and commute to the city. But it's not growing our economic diversity here. It's not growing our tax base for our schools, but yet it's putting the burden on our infrastructure. And so those are all things that we're dealing with and trying to figure out.
Okay, perfect. And Southern Utah is growing as well, and they don't
Yeah.
want to grow, but they kind of have to grow right now. So,
Yeah.
moving on
Oh.
to question 11. Oh, I know there's a lot of questions for you, but
No,
heading
you're
heading
good.
into
No, and I'm not yawning at you. It's just been a long campaign season.
Oh, I understand there because I'm right there with you. But especially heading into Saturday, we need to make sure we get all the questions ironed out, and make
Absolutely.
sure that every delegate has your views, so they can nominate you to that 60% and just pushing through to June. But what are your plans
We're
of
going to need
solving
it.
the healthcare crisis and with the in and outs of networks? Because some hospitals don't take out of network and some doctors. That's been a big issue for a lot of residents here in Utah, and also the Medicare issue.
Sure, yeah, no, the private hospitals, I mean, that's a great thing, but we need to figure out the biggest problem here is Medicaid. Medicaid expansion, Utah participated in Medicaid expansion, which created a lot of issues and unforeseen consequences, such as healthcare plans that would have been available at lower costs that are no longer available. I think I'll have to look at the stats again, but I believe 35%, if not more now, of Utahns are on Medicaid because people can't afford insurance. I mean, what families right now are strapped as it is. They're either uninsured or they're on Medicaid for the most part because unless their employer provides insurance. the biggest problem with Medicaid, and this is where we need to start talking, we need to start talking work requirements for Medicaid, because the problem is, and I say this, so let me elaborate on this first before everybody gets mad at me. What we have right now, when I say work requirements, Medicaid was originally made for those who are in need, those who are not able-bodied, who can't get out, and those who really needed that help. Right now, you have an enormous part of the population that is taking advantage of the system, and that are single-body, able adults with no dependents. Those make up a large portion of Medicaid. These are people who could go get a job, who should have a job, who are able-bodied, and they are single with no dependents, and they just don't want to work. Once you institute work requirements for those types of people, they drop off 80% of them because they don't want to work. They want to sit home. They want to play video games. And there is a massive group of people that is taking off of Medicaid from people who really should have that help, and that was meant to be there for. You know what? You've got small families in this state. You've got young families. You've got an extremely young population. You've got an economy that's out of control. You've got a lot of people that can't afford health insurance right now. And with the way I'm normally, hey, keep government out of it. But in this instance, government has ruined the private sector for medical insurance. It doesn't exist anymore. And so we now have no options but to deal with what's in front of us. But that is the first place we start when talking about Medicaid, is these ABOs, these able-bodied adults. We need to take them and add work requirements to Medicaid. If they're not trying to get a job, they're just trying to be single and milk off the system, we're not playing that game anymore.
So Medicaid is, I believe, the federal part, but what about Medicare as far as the state part?
Yeah, the Medicare, so the federal government puts out the money and the state disseminates the Medicaid. The Medicare part is for the older adults who have paid into Medicare their whole lives. Yes, that should absolutely there. Let's not touch that. I'm sure you've seen the old commercial or whatever it was from the town hall where the old guy says, "You keep your government hands off my Medicare." Well, little did he know that the government is what created Medicare. But those have been paid into for your life. You've paid into Medicare, and that was supposed to be a safety net for these retirees. And we need to continue funding that side of it because they have paid into it. But at some point, we have to step back and say, okay, this younger generation is never going to see the dividends from those. So should they still be paying into Medicare?
Well, the other part of the question is with the in and out of the networks, because sometimes you can go from, let's say, St. Mark's Hospital to IHC, and some of the insurances aren't going to cross over. How could you help bridge that gap? Because that is a big issue with a lot of people, especially here in the state.
Yeah, no, and that's a hard one because then we dive in because I know some of those are privately run hospitals, and so they can take which insurances they want and need. But I think we need to free up the market just a little bit. We need to make it very transparent about who takes what and where they have it. But as far as the government getting involved to force hospitals to take certain insurance plans, that's where we have to be careful because that's a slippery slope.
Well, I mean, that's a go start at least. I mean, at
Yeah.
least you're willing to come to the table and talk about these issues.
Yeah, we have to sit down at the table and talk about them because they are issues. But again, my biggest thing is always, where does government belong? Where doesn't it belong? And how do we keep it in the box it belongs in?
Perfect. So as we keep moving along this podcast, one of the biggest things is what what needs do you think that are the most important for Utah's economic future amid our housing and our rent cost crisis? Because it is exponentially way too high. Some people blame California, but it's not all California's fault. A lot of it is manufactured here in the state of Utah. And what steps will you take to meet those needs of the people to lower the cost so that we can actually live instead of be overburdened by rent cost and housing over inflation?
Yeah, no, the first thing is keep government out of it because anytime government adds money to the housing market, it creates inflation. Anytime it adds money to the regular market, it creates inflation. So the markets need to be corrected themselves. That they are not being able to correct because the government is getting too involved in it. Our governor's done it with his 35,000 homes initiative. He's delved into waters he shouldn't have delved into. One thing we really can't do here is roll back population. And that's something we've been looking heavily into. Regulatory reform is going to cut big costs off of the house. It's going to free us up to build more homes. It's going to bring down the cost of housing. So that is where we start. We try to keep government out as much as we can, let the private sector, and that is by unshackling the private sector and cutting the reform and cutting the regulations.
No, that's perfectly said. And people are really struggling here in the state of Utah because with the Bidenomics, housing costs have just soared through the roof. Rents have increased exponentially, but the paycheck has not went up hardly at all. It's been a stagnation wage. And so
Sure,
that is a big issue for Utahns, especially all across the state. It doesn't matter if you're in urban, suburban, or rural Utah. The housing is the number one thing because it's one of the four necessities of life right now.
yeah,
But
absolutely.
before I get into this next question, and you're not going to really like it because it's been a controversial topic with you specifically as you were a chair. I think you kind of know where I'm going with this when it
Sure,
comes to the party overall with the RNC, and that's dealing with Ronna McDaniel and your
sure,
vote for her. And a lot
yeah.
of well, there's basically one detractor, and you and I both know who that is. But I think the state delegates would love to know what your thought process was into the Ronna McDaniel vote.
Sure. No, this has always, I mean, I've always been honest with people about where I'm at on this one. I went into it with an open mind. I didn't think any of the candidates were really that great going forward. That being said, when I first stepped up to vouch for Rana in the letter that people quote back in November, she was the only person on the ballot. She was the only person running. But let's not forget, it was Trump who actually supported Ronna McDaniel to run in the first place. And Trump was supporting her in that election, whether anybody wants to admit it or not. The current chairman of the National Republican Party, Michael Whatley, he signed the same letter with me that I did, and he is now co-chair with Laura Trump. So that was the thought process that went into it. So as far as the state goes, the state was very evenly split. 30% wanted Mike Lindell, 30% wanted Ronna, 30% wanted Harmeet. There was a very even split. So going into that, my thought process was this: who is going to be the next president of the United States? Who's going to be the Republican nominee that we're going to put up? And the answer was strictly Trump. So I went to the Trump campaign and I reached out to them and I said, all right, here's the deal. We're going into this. Who do you prefer? They said, we've already been in it with Ronna. We think she's good to go forward. We think she's done a fine enough job. We're going to ask for some concessions. And I asked her for some changes. And ultimately, that was who I supported.
Hey, well, very well said. I know there's a couple people, SCC members, that are really
Sure.
pushing back on you because of that, and maybe some state delegates. But now that we get to clarify and colorize that to make your point come across 100% simple, that was
Yeah.
your explanation,
She
and well said.
failed. I mean, after we put her back in, you look at any of the headlines right after she got elected. It says Trump backed McDaniel wins re-election. Trump backed McDaniel wins re-election. Trump supported McDaniel wins re-election. She got back in. She was supported by the president, but she didn't do what she promised she would. We asked her for changes, said, hey, if you're going to be reelected, we want to see these changes. She never did. As you saw a couple months ago, I called for her resignation. I said, you didn't live up to what you said you were going to do. It's time to get out.
No, you didn't. I think we all saw that, and kudos to you for sticking to your guns with that. But we're gonna head off to this last question right here because I know you're up against the wall. You gotta go pick up your kids.
Yeah,
So,
I got to go
do
get a
you ha-
kid from school, but give me your
do you
last one.
have do you have a standalone moment or movement to where you stood by yourself on your principles and not caved to the pressure in both private and public life?
Oh,
That came
100%.
from a delegate down in southern Utah.
Yeah, I think I know who you're talking about, and I've answered this question before, and absolutely. So the first time, and the one that stands out to me, I was elected party chair, went against the governor's slate of candidates. We ultimately prevailed. I got a call within 30 minutes of being elected chair from somebody in a high up place and said, if you don't kiss the governor's ring, and that was the exact wording he used, if you don't kiss the governor's ring, they're going to cut off funding from you and they're going to break the party. And I said, good luck. You better pack a lunch because it's going to be a long day. We went into it about 6 months later. Yeah, the party, we were, it was a struggle. We were making it work and we were making adjustments, but it was tough. A big group of donors came to me and said, hey, we want to come back. They're historical donors to the party. They came back and said, hey, if you will make amends with the governor and bring the party back over to where the governor's at, then we'll bring money back to the party. We'll start donating again. I said, guys, if you think you're going to buy my principles and my morals and make me change what I believe in for money, you have found the wrong person. Ultimately, it cost the party $100,000, but that was somewhere I was unwilling to move for my principles.
Good. That's the standalone moment where people want to see that you stood by yourself, stood up for your principles, and stood to your laurels. That's
Yep.
great. But in leaving this, because I know you got to go, I want your best argument to why you should be the governor of the state of Utah. And I will let you take the floor. I'll give you a few minutes or take as much time as you would like. But make your best case for the state delegates going into Saturday's convention.
Yeah, no. Again, the struggles that state is going to have over the next 10 years, my area expertise is how I've grown up. It's what I know. It's what I do. I am the best representative of the average age of the state of Utah, and I bridge that gap between rural and urban. I have a vast knowledge of things that are going on in the state and how we're going to handle those. I have taken a lot of time to educate myself and those around me to pick good people and put them in place. We have an intimate knowledge of what's happening. I have principles. Everybody has seen this from day one, and I hate to say that I do, but I have proven myself time and time again that I'm willing to stand by what I say. You may not always be happy with what I say, but at least you won't be mad at me for lying to you, because that's something I'm unafraid to do. We're going to say what we mean and mean what we say. We're bringing common sense back to politics. We're going to run this with no BS, and we're going to take it and make Utah the way that Utah should be.
Do you have a catchphrase to go along with that?
I'm always I don't really have a catchphrase, but to me, it's always it's simply common sense. What's missing from this world is common sense.
Common sense is very uncommon these days.
That it is.
Carson, thank you for joining us right here on Raw Real Podcast and Beyond the Podium. Thank you for having you. Good luck this Saturday at the convention. I know you have a booth while I'll be walking the floor. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, Carson Jorgensen, running for the Utah Gubernatorial Candidate for the state of Utah. Wish him good luck. Let's get him to that 60%. Carson, any last words?
Looking forward to seeing you Saturday, and look forward to earning your support.
Hey, perfectly well said. Anyway, that was Carson Jorgensen. Thank you, Carson. I'm Ty Jensen. I'm running for your RNC National Committeeman as well. So we hope to have you at the state convention. We want to talk to all of you. Stop by Carson's booth. I'll be walking the floor. Anyway, thank you. God bless. Everybody drive safe this weekend. And thank you for participating in today's podcast. Thank you and good luck.
Have a good day.